426 Hemi versus Hellcat Showdown. Old school versus new school. Your uncle still talks about his 1970 Hemi Cuda like it was the love of his life. Dual snorkel air cleaner, that distinctive hemispherical rumble, and enough power to make insurance companies break out in cold sweats. When he fired it up at family gatherings, everyone knew they were hearing automotive royalty from the golden age of American muscle. Then your cousin rolled up to last year's car show in his brand new Hellcat Challenger, and suddenly that legendary Hemi didn't sound quite so intimidating anymore. This is the story of what happens when 50 years of automotive evolution collides with the most legendary engine Detroit ever built. Old school brute force versus modern supercharged sophistication. Raw mechanical violence versus computer-controlled precision. The question everyone's been asking since Dodge brought back the Hemi name. Can modern engineering really improve on perfection? One engine defined an entire era of American performance. The other represents everything we've learned about making power in half a century of technological advancement. The 426 Hemi wasn't built to be civilized, fuel-efficient, or emissions-compliant. This was Chrysler's middle finger to physics, designed when horsepower was the only specification that mattered, and environmental concerns were somebody else's problem. Walking up to a Hemi car in 1970 felt like approaching something that had escaped from a drag strip. That massive dual snorkel air cleaner dominated the engine bay, and those hemispherical combustion chambers underneath could flow air like nothing else on Earth. The sound when someone fired up a Hemi was pure mechanical fury, part controlled explosion, part industrial symphony that made your chest vibrate from across the parking lot. What made the Hemi legendary was its complete lack of compromise. Those hemispherical combustion chambers allowed massive valves to breathe freely, while compression ratios that would destroy modern engines on pump gas were considered normal operating procedure. The result was an engine that made power through pure mechanical violence. Chrysler officially rated the street Hemi at 425 horsepower, but everyone who owned one knew that was conservative fiction designed to keep insurance companies from having nervous breakdowns. Independent dyno testing consistently showed street Hemis making between 470 and 500 horsepower, with torque curves that could twist chassis if you weren't careful with the throttle. At around $4,000 all in, a Hemi Cuda or Challenger cost serious money in 1970. When you experienced what 500 naturally aspirated horses felt like trying to tear the car apart, every penny seemed justified. The Hemi was available for exactly 6 years in street cars from 1966 to 1971, before emissions regulations and insurance costs killed it off, making every survivor a rolling piece of automotive history. When Dodge announced they were bringing back the Hemi name in 2003, muscle car purists were skeptical. How could any modern engine live up to the legend of the original elephant? The answer came in 2015 when they unleashed the supercharged Hellcat, and suddenly nobody was questioning Dodge's commitment to insanity. The Hellcat represents everything the original Hemi wasn't: sophisticated, reliable, emissions-compliant, and absolutely brutal in ways the 1970s never imagined possible. That massive supercharger sitting atop the 6.2-liter Hemi creates a power delivery that's both more violent and more controllable than anything from the muscle car era. Walking up to a Hellcat feels like approaching the future of American performance. That functional hood scoop feeds air to an intercooler system that would have seemed like science fiction in 1970. The engine bay is packed with sensors, computers, and technology that manages power delivery with precision the original Hemi could never achieve. Dodge officially rates the Hellcat at 707 horsepower, and unlike the underrated classics, that number is completely honest. Independent dyno testing confirms that Hellcats consistently make their advertised power, sometimes more. We're talking about nearly 50% more power than the strongest original Hemi, delivered through a drivetrain that can handle the abuse day after day. At around $75,000, a Hellcat Challenger costs serious money by modern standards, but represents incredible value when you consider the performance. You're getting more power than most supercars, wrapped in retro styling that pays homage to the original muscle car era, while delivering modern reliability and refinement. The fundamental difference between these two engines comes down to philosophy. The original Hemi was designed when more power meant bigger displacement, higher compression, and accepting the compromises that came with mechanical extremism. The Hellcat represents modern thinking. Use technology to extract maximum power while maintaining drivability and reliability. The 426 Hemi made its power through pure displacement and compression. At 426 cubic inches, with compression ratios around 10.25 to 1, it was essentially a racing engine that happened to be street legal. Peak torque arrived around 4,000 RPM and fell off quickly, creating a power band that required skill to use effectively. The Hellcat takes a completely different approach. At 376 cubic inches, it's actually smaller than the original Hemi, but that supercharger changes everything. Peak torque arrives at just 4,800 RPM, but the supercharger creates a power band that pulls strongly from 2,000 RPM all the way to redline. It's more power delivered more usably than the original ever dreamed possible. The original Hemi required premium fuel, frequent tuning, and constant attention to keep running properly. Compression ratios that high meant any deviation from perfect conditions could result in destructive detonation. The Hellcat runs happily on regular unleaded, goes 100,000 miles between major services, and delivers consistent performance regardless of weather, altitude, or driver skill level. The real difference becomes obvious when both engines hit the pavement. When Car and Driver tested a 1970 Hemi Cuda back in the day, they recorded a 13.1-second quarter mile at 107 miles per hour. Those were incredible numbers for 1970, representing the absolute pinnacle of American street performance. The Hemi launched hard, pulled strongly through the gears, and crossed the finish line faster than anything else you could buy from a domestic manufacturer. Fast forward to today, and Motor Trend tested a stock Hellcat Challenger at 11.2 seconds at 125 miles per hour in the quarter mile. We're talking about nearly 2 full seconds quicker, with a trap speed that's almost 20 miles per hour higher. The Hellcat doesn't just beat the original Hemi, it embarrasses it thoroughly. The acceleration difference is even more dramatic. A good Hemi Cuda could hit 60 miles per hour in around 5.8 seconds, which seemed impossibly fast in 1970. The Hellcat rockets to 60 miles per hour in 3.6 seconds, a number that would have been pure science fiction when the original Hemi was new. The original Hemi was a handful in any situation that required precision. That massive torque hit like a sledgehammer. The suspension technology of 1970 couldn't control wheel hop, and the braking systems were marginal at best for repeated high-speed stops. The Hellcat delivers its 707 horsepower through advanced traction control, launch control, and stability management systems that allow drivers to use every bit of available performance safely. Modern suspension geometry, Brembo brakes, and sophisticated electronic aids mean the Hellcat can be driven hard by anyone with basic driving skills. Despite being completely outclassed in terms of raw performance, the original Hemi still has advantages that modern technology can't replicate. The most obvious is sound. Nothing in automotive history has ever matched the distinctive rumble of a naturally aspirated Hemi at idle, building to a crescendo that could wake the dead 3 counties over. The Hellcat sounds impressive, but that supercharger whine changes the character completely. It's more refined, more controlled, but somehow less visceral than the original's mechanical symphony. The 426 Hemi sounded like barely controlled violence even at idle, while the Hellcat sounds sophisticated and precise. There's also something to be said for the original's simplicity. Pop the hood of a 1970 Hemi car, and you can see every component, understand how it works, and probably fix most problems with basic tools. The Hellcat's engine bay looks like a computer laboratory, packed with sensors, wiring harnesses, and components that require factory diagnostic equipment to service properly. The original Hemi was also more engaging to drive, demanding skill and attention that made every drive an event. You had to understand how to launch it properly, when to shift for maximum performance, and how to modulate the throttle to avoid losing traction. The Hellcat does most of that thinking for you, which makes it faster but somehow less involving. Most importantly, the original Hemi represented the absolute peak of an era when American manufacturers were willing to build anything, regardless of practicality, emissions, or fuel economy. It was automotive excess at its purest, and that kind of complete disregard for consequences will never exist again. Which engine wins this generational showdown? The answer depends entirely on what you value most in a performance car. If you want the fastest, most capable, most reliable high-performance engine ever built, the Hellcat wins by a landslide. It makes more power, delivers it more usably, lasts longer, and can be driven hard by anyone without special skills or knowledge. It represents the absolute pinnacle of American automotive engineering, incorporating 50 years of technological advancement into a package that would seem impossible to engineers from 1970. If you want soul, character, and the kind of raw mechanical experience that modern cars can't replicate, the original Hemi remains unmatched. It's an engine that demands respect, rewards skill, and delivers an emotional connection that no amount of technology can replicate. Every drive in a Hemi car is an event, a connection to an era when horsepower was the only thing that mattered. The Hellcat proves that modern engineering can improve on classic performance in every measurable way. The original Hemi proves that some things can't be measured. The satisfaction of mastering a temperamental machine, the pride of owning something genuinely rare and special, and the knowledge that you're experiencing automotive history firsthand. Both engines represent the absolute best of their respective eras. The 426 Hemi defined what American muscle cars could be when freed from all constraints. The Hellcat shows what American muscle cars can be when technology removes the constraints that once limited performance. The 426 Hemi versus the Hellcat, and the story of how 50 years of automotive evolution created something faster, stronger, and more capable than the original legend. The Hellcat proves that modern technology can improve on classic performance in every measurable way. Which philosophy speaks to you? Do you prefer the Hellcat's sophisticated brutality and everyday usability, knowing you're experiencing the most advanced American performance engine ever built? Or do you appreciate the original Hemi's raw mechanical character and historical significance, understanding that some experiences can't be replicated by technology? Let us know in the comments, and get ready for a debate between old-school purists and modern performance enthusiasts. The classic versus modern battle never really ends. It just gets faster and more sophisticated. If this generational showdown opened your eyes to how far American muscle has evolved, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Next week, we're diving into another classic versus modern battle that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about automotive progress. Thanks for riding along through 50 years of Hemi evolution. And remember, whether it's 1970 or 2025, there's nothing quite like the sound of American muscle reminding the world that more power is always the answer.